Hello, welcome to our video today. I'm Jeff Zwarenk, and I have the joy of being joined by my friend Dr. Tim Boyle, and we're just going to get a little bit of chance to know him better. Tim, it's good to have you here today.
Glad to be here.
So I know you've been connected with Reasons to Believe for a long time. You've been a Christian for a long time, serving as a missionary. Just kind of give us a little bit of background. Who are you and what do you do?
Okay, well, I've been a missionary in Japan since first in 1971 to 74 as a short-termer, and then as a full-time, a regular missionary from 82 until retirement.
Well, that's quite an extended period of time. So.
I grew up in Arizona,
okay.
And as a particularly in high school and stuff, I was particularly interested in science. And at Arizona State University, I was a physics major.
All right.
I was going to be a scientist when I grew up. When I graduated, I had a Natural Science Foundation fellowship at Florida State doing meteorology, and so that was my goal. But during my junior year of college, I had the opportunity to study Japanese at the East-West Center in Hawaii, and so that's where the Japan connection started. And then during the Vietnam War, and I was drafted out of grad school, so I had to quit, lost the fellowship and that sort of stuff. And it's a long story. I didn't end up actually having to serve in the active military. I won't go into the details, but ended up being kind of in limbo. Got an honorable discharge, didn't have to go. And then this opportunity to go to Japan for 3 years as a short-term missionary came up. I thought, well, this would be a good way to kind of test the waters and see if that's what God wanted me to do with my life or not.
Okay.
And if not, then I'd go back to grad school and finish up my PhD in meteorology. I'd been a weather scientist.
So you said you had a physics major. We were going into meteorology in grad school. What got you interested in science?
That's a good question. I mean, even from high school, that's where my focus was. I just loved the science and stuff, and so I'm not sure I could say what the one thing that got me interested in it. It's just I grew up that way.
Something you just always enjoyed, huh?
Yeah, right.
So, what on the flip side of that? What got you, or how'd you become a Christian? What got you interested?
Well, I
in that?
grew up in the church. As I was in the United Methodist Church as a kid, and there wasn't any one experience. So, for instance, there's no road to Damascus conversion experience like that, where there was, I could say, definitely before. I'm not a follower of Christ, and right after that, I definitely was. There's a series of things, and so it's a little hard to say exactly when, I became a Christian, but it was through a variety of experiences, and then and the science and faith issue wasn't really a big part. I mean, there's this kind of perceived conflict or something like that. That wasn't a big issue earlier, and then. Well, after I had lost the fellowship at Florida State, and then had this opportunity to serve overseas in Japan for 3 years as a lay missionary, I really felt God was calling me to go to seminary and become a pastor, and so that's what I did, and started at Asbury Seminary in Kentucky, and then transferred to Fuller Seminary here, and locally in Pasadena.
Okay.
And finished out my MDiv and then later on a DMin degree there.
Okay, so you have a theology degree, the MDiv and the DMin. You have the bachelor's in physics. Were you ever able to complete your meteorology?
Just the 1 year of grad school, and then so I had kind of the equivalent of another bachelor's degree, really, because going from physics to meteorology, I had to take a lot of undergraduate meteorology just to catch up with that then.
And then you spent a number of decades living in Japan as well. What tell us about that experience? How did you grow in that? What have you learned, and what did you see important there?
Well, Japan as a mission field is, of course, a lot different than the typical image that a lot of people have. Pith hat, walking through the jungles or something like that. And so Japan is a very developed country. And very, well-to-do kind of. So in that sense, there's not this great contrast between the U.S. and Japan on that level, but it's an entirely different culture. Of course, learning the language, and then learning how to, feel really at home became my second home. So sometimes I kind of forget I mean, I can think how to say something in Japanese, and how do you say that in English now? I'm trying to remember, and I can't think of it, that kind of stuff,
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is there, what are some of the big differences between the two cultures? Do you fit fairly well in both, or do you kind of find one more natural than the other?
It depends on what aspect you're talking about, because there's certain aspects of Japanese culture and stuff that I never really felt comfortable with, the formalism and they have, the language, they have this honorific styles and this sort of stuff. I mean, I understand it, but if I try to do that, it's not natural, because I'm a laid back and American, that kind of stuff. So that part doesn't really fit very well. But and I feel really comfortable in both places pretty much. Mm-hmm. My first experience coming back to the U.S. after having been there 3.5 years was a bit of reverse culture shock, I would say. That was the hardest part, really.
Really?
Just because it seemed so, it was just kind of lost for a while. But after doing it back and forth many times, that you don't experience that anymore.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what have you found, as someone who's maybe an American who would be going into the Japanese culture, or vice versa, Japanese coming into American culture, that would, in terms of what does it mean to live as a Christian and share the gospel, is there any advice or thoughts that you've learned in having lived the dual life there?
Well, of course, Japan is a shame culture, as it's called, and so as opposed to the American or other Anglo-American type cultures being what was called a guilt culture, and so there's the way that you make decisions, the way that you fit. This shame culture is focused on saving face and things like this. That it doesn't mean we don't experience that here too, but not to the same degree. And so there's lots of things like that are different. And so a Japanese coming into live in America, for instance, they experience a kind of dissonance at that point too. Americans are so kind of, they come across as kind of pushy and aggressive like this, where Japanese seem to be more passive, and yet there's a lot of exceptions. I've met some pretty pushy Japanese too.
Oh yeah.
But it's rare.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if there was one bit of advice or counsel or thought you'd have out of just the things that you've learned in your life that you'd want to pass on to, either someone wanting to go into missions or just to live as a Christian who has a scientific interest, what would that be?
Well, I suppose, of course, with the scientific interest part, in other words, realizing that science and the Christian faith go together very, very well. It's not, there's this perceived conflict scenario that is so commonly, that you see a lot in society. It's just, that's not where it really is. And when you really look at the science and look at the faith, and you're properly interpreting both, there's no conflict at all. So that's really important, I think. But when it comes to communicating that to others, and for instance, if you're trying to communicate a message, the gospel message, for instance, but you're using Western concepts and things like that, and you're doing it in a shame group-oriented culture, that often does not communicate. And so you need to be able to understand your audience and communicate in a way that they can relate to, that there's a common, and anytime you're communicating anything, it's through symbols and through words and gestures and whatever, and the other person has to interpret that, and but they can only do that within their frame of reference, and so you have to understand that frame of reference, and then be able to adjust your message so that it fits.
Well, thanks, Tim. I appreciate it very much. I would encourage you to go to reasons.org and search for Tim Boyle. You'll find his webpage there, be able to learn more about Tim and some of the resources he's developed that show how science and the Christian faith really do work well together.